Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of all the things the committee could be focusing on, this is sort of top of our list for a good reason. We just got back from Africa on our CODEL, and what I learned was these parks are sort of sanctuaries of governance and law and order surrounded by a lot of upheaval. So if we're up to me, I would have a string of parks, conservation parks, all over Africa, because it may be the only place a community can reside with some level of peace and certainty in terms of the rule of law. Do all of you support the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation Act introduced by Senator Coons and myself?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we do.
Good.
Yes, sir.
Probably why you're here. Now, the goal of Chris and myself is to create a public-private relationship where the private sector sort of leads and puts their money where their mouth is, collaborating with the United States government and other people, hopefully other governments, to make sure that these parks are well managed, that we deal with poaching by force, and that the communities surrounding these parks benefit. Mr. Steer, is that right? Dr. Steer?
Absolutely right, Senator.
So-
we believe this initiative is a very good one. The way you describe it is absolutely right, and there are certain components that will make this very successful. It's if the private sector, as you say, comes in and works together with the public funding, if the emphasis is on long-term, if we think precisely the way you're talking about good governance, but also thinking about citizens who live outside the area who maybe are not able to get the incomes they used to get before. So we've got to be pretty imaginative in order to make sure there are alternative livelihoods. And then we need to monitor very carefully. We now have the capacity using satellite technology to see almost every tree falling. That is very, very valuable information, and we need to be very disciplined. We in the Bezos Earth Fund are very highly engaged in that space, and we are very interested in partnering with you in this new proposed fund.
Well, Dr. Steer, I appreciate that, and to other groups like yours, I'd love to work with you. The goal here, I guess, is to have the local community feel like the park is an asset. Is that correct, everybody? They're nodding their head. Protecting the animals is better business than allowing them to be poached. Everybody's nodding their head, right?
Yes, absolutely. Before your arrival, we discussed the importance of community engagement. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and so when we collect fees for people who visit these parks, we want to make sure that the local community feels the benefit of that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So,
So what I would suggest to my colleagues in Congress, if you want to do something to bring about better governance and a semblance of the rule of law in this part of the world, in these ungoverned spaces, the parks are your best opportunity. Dr. Steer, the Africa Parks, are you familiar with that group?
yes, indeed. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we believe that they are very expert. I mean, in Africa, there are some very, very good groups. Some are international, non-governmental organizations, many based, their headquarters in the United States.
But let's explain for the public if we can. Mr., how do you say your last name, sir?
Sebunya, sir.
Okay, so let's walk through real quickly how this works. A group called Africa Parks will take over the park. They will provide security, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, and they will have the capability to fight the poachers, right?
Yes, sir.
And their emphasis is on helping the local community surrounding the park.
I don't know. I don't work for Africa Park, Senator, but yes, in some cases.
Okay, Dr. Steer, is that sort of generally the way Africa Parks works?
I believe so. Yes, indeed.
Okay, well, the reason I mentioned it's a private sector group, right? Nonprofit. And so what we want to do is that where the government is failing in some of these countries due to corruption or whatever, is to bring something new to the table and hopefully get the government buy-in what we're doing. So, like Botswana, they got great parks. The government seems to be buying into this public-private partnership. What I would suggest to the chairman here is not only we pass our bill, but we put the countries in question on notice. We expect you to up your game. We expect you to make sure that the money being generated for all this activity, some of it actually goes to the people. So I'm really excited about how this effort to conserve nature and protect animals actually is probably one of the best antidotes to the spread of terrorism and international criminality. The biggest benefit from this, beyond protecting the wildlife itself, I think is to have a system that can make it harder not only for illegal traffickers and wild poachers, but also people involved in radical activity. And, Mr. Chairman, I think we're on to something here. I think this is you're at USAID, is that right, Ms. Caldwell?
Yes, sir.
Do you consider this a threat to what you do?
No, I don't. I understand you're working to ensure this is additional funding, and of course, we're absolutely supportive of ensuring a further $200 million a year for 10 years for biodiversity conservation.
So it is additional funding, but it's not just additional funding, it's a fundamentally new approach. Dr. Steer, if you could just wrap this up for us, how do you think the private sector will respond to this idea? And should we be optimistic that we're on the right track in terms of the public-private partnerships?
I think the private sector, both the philanthropic private sector and even the for-profit private sector, would respond very, very well to this. And the reason for that is that we are more effective if we work with the public sector. So it's not actually just dollars that we hope you'll be putting into this fund. It is actually influence and engagement. And even now, clearly, when you, Senator Graham, and you, Senator Coons, go on these visits, you meet at the head of state level, you engage, that is incredibly useful. It will be even more useful if we could do it in partnership, whereby when you go, you not only have public money, but actually you're engaged with something much bigger than that, where the private sector is. So whilst we are very, very good at putting money into NGOs, you're very, very good at doing that, plus you're very, very good at engaging at the very head of state. So that's why we're interested in working with you. And it's certainly not just me. In my written testimony, I talked about a group of philanthropists, $5 billion put on the table, not particularly specifically for this particular initiative, but would be very interested in working with you in the design and the implementation.